Chapter 3, Part 1 of Aircraft and Submarines by Willis J. Abbott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. The Services of Santos-Dumont. Part 1. In his book, My Airships, the distinguished aviator A. Santos-Dumont tells this story of the ambition of his youth and its realization in later days. I cannot say at what age I made my first kites, but I remember how my comrades used to tease me at our game of pigeon flies. All the children gather round a table, and the leader calls out, "Pigeon flies, hen flies, crow flies, bee flies," and so on, and at each call we were supposed to raise our fingers. Sometimes, however, he would call out dog flies, fox flies, or some other like impossibility to catch us. If anyone raised a finger, then he was made to pay a forfeit. Now, my playmates never failed to wink and smile mockingly at me when one of them called man flies, for at the word I would always raise my finger very high, as a sign of absolute conviction, and I refused with energy to pay the forfeit. The more they laughed at me, the happier I was, hoping that some day the laugh would be on my side. Among the thousands of letters which I received after winning the Deutsch prize, a prize offered in 1901 for sailing around the Eiffel Tower, there was one that gave me peculiar pleasure. I quote from it as a matter of curiosity. "Do you remember, my dear Alberto, when we played together pigeon flies? It came back to me suddenly when the news of your success reached Rio. Man flies, old fellow. You were right to raise your finger, and you have just proved it by flying round the Eiffel Tower." They play the old game now more than ever at home, but the name has been changed, and the rules modified since October 19, 1901. They call it now man flies, and he who does not raise his finger at the word pays the forfeit. The story of Santos-Dumont affords a curious instance of a boy being obsessed by an idea which as a man he carried to its successful fruition. It offers also evidence of the service that may accrue to society from the devotion of a dilettante to what people may call a fad, but what is in fact the germ of a great idea needing only an enthusiast with enthusiasm, brains, and money for its development. Because the efforts of Santos-Dumont always smacked of the amateur, he has been denied his real place in the history of aeronautics, which is that of a fearless innovator and a devoted worker in the cause. Born on one of those great coffee plantations of Brazil, where all is done by machinery that possibly can be, Santos-Dumont early developed a passion for mechanics. In childhood he made toy airplanes. He confesses that his favorite author was Jules Verne, and that literary idol of boyhood, who, while writing books as wildly imaginative as any dime tale of Redskins or nickel novel of the doings of Nick Carter, had none the less the spirit of prophecy that led him to forecast the submarine, the automobile, and the navigation of the air. At 15, Santos-Dumont saw his first balloon and marked the day with red. "I too desire to go ballooning," he writes. "In the long sun-bathed Brazilian afternoons, when the hum of insects, punctuated by the far-off cry of some bird, lulled me, I would lie in the shade of the veranda and gaze into the fair sky of Brazil, where the birds fly so high and soar with such ease on their great outstretched wings, where the clouds mount so gaily in the pure light of day, and you have only to raise your eyes to fall in love with space and freedom." So, musing on the exploration of the aerial ocean, I, too, devised airships and flying machines in my imagination. From dreaming, the boy's ambitions rapidly developed into actions. Good South Americans, whatever the practice of their northern neighbors, do not wait to die before going to Paris. At the age of 18, the youth found himself in the capital of the world. To his amazement, he found that the science of aeronautics, such as it was, had stopped with Giffard's work in 1852. No dirigible was to be heard of in all Paris. The antiquated gas ball was the only way to approach the upper air. When the boy tried to arrange for an ascension, the balloonist he consulted put so unconscionable a price on one ascent that he bought an automobile instead, one of the first made, for this was in 1891, and with it returned to Brazil. It was not until 6 years later that, his ambition newly fired by reading of André's plans for reaching the Pole in a balloon, Santos-Dumont took up anew his ambition to become an aviator. His own account of his first ascent does not bear precisely the hall mark of the enthusiast too wrapped in ecstasy to think of common things. "I had brought up," he notes gravely, "a substantial lunch of hard-boiled eggs, cold roast beef and chicken, cheese, ice cream, fruits and cakes, champagne, coffee, and chartreuse." The balloon with its intrepid voyagers nevertheless returned to earth in safety. A picturesque figure, an habitué of the clubs, and an eager sportsman, Santos-Dumont at once won the liking of the French people, and attracted attention wherever people gave thought to aviation. Liberal in expenditure of money, and utterly fearless in exposing his life, he pushed his experiments for the development of a true dirigible tirelessly. Perhaps his major fault was that he learned but slowly from the experiences of others. He clung to the spherical balloon long after the impossibility of controlling it in the air was accepted as unavoidable by aeronauts. But in 1898, having become infatuated with the performances of a little 66-pound tricycle motor, he determined to build a cigar-shaped airship to fit it, and with that determination won success. Amateur he may have been, was indeed throughout the greater part of his career as an airman. Nevertheless, Santos-Dumont has to his credit two very notable achievements. He was the first constructor and pilot of a dirigible balloon that made a round trip, that is to say, returned to its starting place after rounding a stake at some distance, in this instance the Eiffel Tower, 3½ miles from St. Cloud, whence Santos-Dumont started, and whither he returned within half an hour, the time prescribed. This was not, indeed, the first occasion on which a round trip, necessitating operation against the wind on at least one course, had been made. In 1884, Captain Renard had accomplished this feat for the first time with the fish-shaped balloon La France, driven by an electric motor of 9 horsepower. But though thus antedated in his exploit, Santos-Dumont did in fact accomplish more for the advancement and development of dirigible balloons. To begin with, he was able to use a new and efficient form of motor destined to become popular, and capable, as the automobile manufacturers later showed, of almost illimitable development in the direction of power and lightness. Except for the gasoline engine, developed by the makers of motor cars, aviation today would be where it was a quarter of a century ago. Moreover, by his personal qualities, no less than by his successful demonstration of the possibilities inherent in the dirigible, Santos-Dumont persuaded the French government to take up aeronautics again, after abandoning the subject as a mere fad of a number of visionaries. Turning from balloons to airplanes, the Brazilian was the first aviator to make a flight with a heavier-than-air machine before a body of judges. This triumph was mainly technical. The Wrights had made an equally notable flight almost a year before, but not under conditions that made it a matter of scientific record. But setting aside for the time the work done by Santos-Dumont with machines heavier than air, let us consider his triumphs with balloons at the opening of his career. He had come to France about 40 years after Henry Giffard had demonstrated the practicability of navigating a balloon 144 feet long and 34 feet in diameter with a 3 horsepower steam engine. But no material success attended this demonstration, important as it was, and the inventor turned his attention to captive balloons, operating one at the Paris Exposition of 1878 that took up 40 passengers at a time. There followed Captain Renard, to whose achievement we have already referred. He had laid down as the fundamentals of a dirigible balloon these specifications: a cigar or fish-like shape, an internal sac or balloonette into which air might be pumped to replace any lost gas and maintain the shape of the balloon, a keel or other longitudinal brace to maintain the longitudinal stability of the balloon and from which the car containing the motor might be hung, a propeller driven by a motor, the size and power of both to be as great as permitted by the lifting power of the balloon, a rudder capable of controlling the course of the ship. Santos-Dumont adopted all of these specifications, but added to them certain improvements which gave his airships, he built 5 of them before taking his first prize, notable superiority over that of Renard. To begin with, he had the inestimable advantage of having the gasoline motor. He further lightened his craft by having the envelope made of Japanese silk, in flat defiance of all the builders of balloons who assured him that the substance was too light and its use would be suicidal. "All right," said the innovator to his favorite constructor, who refused to build him a balloon of that material, "I'll build it myself." In the face of this threat the builder capitulated. The balloon was built, and the silk proved to be the best fabric available at that time for the purpose. A keel made of strips of pine, banded together with aluminum wire, formed the backbone of the Santos-Dumont craft, and from it depended the car about 1/4 of the length of the balloon and hung squarely amidships. The idea of this keel occurred to the inventor while pleasuring at Nice. Later it saved his life. One novel and exceedingly simple device bore witness to the ingenuity of the inventor. He had noticed in his days of free ballooning that to rise the aeronaut had to throw out sand ballast. To descend he had to open the valves and let out gas. As his supply of both gas and sand was limited, it was clear that the time of his flight was necessarily curtailed every time he ascended or descended. Santos-Dumont thought to husband his supplies of lifting force and of ballast, and make the motor raise and lower the ship. It was obvious that the craft would go whichever way the bow might be pointed, whether up or down. But how to shift the bow? The solution seems so simple that one wonders it ever perplexed aviators. From the peak of the bow and stern of his craft, Santos-Dumont hung long ropes caught in the center by lighter ropes by which they could be dragged into the car. In the car was carried a heavy bag of sand, which, so long as it was there, held the ship in a horizontal plane. Was it needful to depress the bow? Then the bow rope was hauled in, the bag attached and swung out to a position where it would pull the forward tip of the delicately adjusted gas bag toward the earth. If only a gentle inclination was desired, the bag was not allowed to hang directly under the bow, but was held at a point somewhere between the car and the bow so that the pull would be diagonal and the great cylinder would be diverted but little from the horizontal. If it were desired to ascend, a like manipulation of the ballast on the stern rope would depress the stern and point the bow upwards. For slight changes in direction it was not necessary even to attach the sand bag. Merely drawing the rope into the car and thus changing the line of its pull was sufficient. The Deutsch prize which stimulated Santos-Dumont to his greatest achievements with dirigibles was a purse of $20,000 offered by Mr. Henry Deutsch, a wealthy patron of the art of aviation. Not himself an aviator, Monsieur Deutsch greatly aided the progress of the air's conquest. Convinced that the true solution of the problem lay in development of the gasoline engine, he expended large sums in developing and perfecting it. When he believed it was sufficiently developed to solve the problem of directing the flight of balloons, he offered his prize for the circuit of the Eiffel Tower. The conditions of the contest were not easy. The competitor had to sail from the Aero Club at St. Cloud, pass twice over the Seine, which at that point makes an abrupt bend, sail over the Bois de Boulogne, circle the tower, and return to the stopping place within a half an hour. The distance was about 7 miles, and it is noteworthy that in his own comment on the test Santos-Dumont complains that that required an average speed of 15 miles an hour, of which he could not be sure with his balloon. Today dirigibles make 60 miles an hour, and airplanes not infrequently reach 130 miles. Moreover, there could be no picking of a day on which atmospheric conditions were especially good. Mr. Deutsch has stipulated that the test must be made in the presence of a scientific commission whose members must be notified 24 hours in advance. None could tell 24 hours ahead what the air might be like, and as for utilizing the aviator's most favorable hour, the calm of the dawn, Monsieur Santos-Dumont remarked, "The duelist may call out his friends at that sacred hour, but not the airship captain." The craft with which the Brazilian first strove to win the Deutsch prize he called Santos-Dumont No. 5. It was a cylinder, sharp at both ends, 109 feet long, and driven by a 12 horsepower motor. The new feature was the use of piano wire for the support of the car, thus greatly reducing the resistance of the air, which in the case of the old cord suspensions was almost as great as that of the balloon itself. Another novel feature was water ballast tanks forward and aft on the balloon itself and holding together 12 gallons. By pulling steel wires in the car, the aviator could open the stop cocks. The layman scarcely appreciates the very slight shift in ballast which will affect the stability of a dirigible. The shifting of a rope a few feet from its normal position, the dropping of 2 handfuls of sand, or release of a cup of water will do it. A humorous writer describing a lunch with Santos-Dumont in the air says, "Nothing must be thrown overboard, be it a bottle, an empty box, or a chicken bone, without the pilot's permission." After unofficial tests of his "No. 5," in one of which he circled the tower without difficulty, Santos-Dumont summoned the Scientific Commission for a test. In 10 minutes he had turned the tower and started back against a fierce head wind, which made him 10 minutes late in reaching the timekeepers. Just as he did so his engine failed, and after drifting for a time his ship perched on top of a chestnut tree on the estate of M. Edmond Rothschild. Philosophical as ever, the aeronaut clung to his craft, dispatched an excellent lunch which the Princess Isabel Comtesse d'Eu, daughter of Dom Pedro, the deposed Emperor of Brazil, sent to his eyrie in the branches, and finally extricated himself and his balloon, neither much the worse for the accident. He had failed, but his determination to win was only whetted. The second trial for the Deutsch prize, like the first, ended in failure, but that failure was so much more dramatic even than the success which attended the third effort that it is worth telling, and can best be told in M. Santos-Dumont's own words. The quotation is from his memoir, My Airships. And now I come to a terrible day, 8th of August, 1901. At 6:30 A.M., in presence of the Scientific Commission of the Aero Club, I started again for the Eiffel Tower. I turned the tower at the end of 9 minutes and took my way back to St. Cloud, but my balloon was losing hydrogen through one of its 2 automatic gas valves whose spring had been accidentally weakened. I had perceived the beginning of this loss of gas even before reaching the Eiffel Tower, and ordinarily, in such an event, I should have come at once to earth to examine the lesion. But here I was, competing for a prize of great honor, and my speed had been good. Therefore I risked going on. The balloon now shrunk visibly. By the time I had got back to the fortifications of Paris, near La Muette, it caused the suspension wires to sag so much that those nearest to the screw propeller caught in it as it revolved. I saw the propeller cutting and tearing at the wires. I stopped the motor instantly. Then, as a consequence, the airship was at once driven back toward the tower by the wind, which was strong. At the same time I was falling. The balloon had lost much gas. I might have thrown out ballast and greatly diminished the fall, but then the wind would have time to blow me back on the Eiffel Tower. I therefore preferred to let the airship go down as it was going. It may have seemed a terrific fall to those who watched it from the ground, but to me the worst detail was the airship's lack of equilibrium. The half-empty balloon, fluttering its empty end as an elephant waves his trunk, caused the airship's stern to point upward at an alarming angle. What I most feared, therefore, was that the unequal strain on the suspension wires would break them one by one, and so precipitate me to the ground. Why was the balloon fluttering an empty end causing all this extra danger? How was it that the rotary ventilator was not fulfilling its purpose in feeding the interior air balloon and in this manner swelling out the gas balloon around it? The answer must be looked for in the nature of the accident. The rotary ventilator stopped working when the motor itself stopped, and I had been obliged to stop the motor to prevent the propeller from tearing the suspension wires near it when the balloon first began to sag from loss of gas. It is true that the ventilator which was working at that moment had not proved sufficient to prevent the first sagging. It may have been that the interior balloon refused to fill out properly. The day after the accident, when my balloon constructor's man came to me for the plans of a No. 6 balloon envelope, I gathered from something he said that the interior balloon of No. 5, not having been given time for its varnish to dry before being adjusted, might have stuck together or stuck to the sides or bottom of the outer balloon. Such are the rewards of haste. I was falling. At the same time the wind was carrying me toward the Eiffel Tower. It had already carried me so far that I was expecting to land on the Seine embankment beyond the Trocadero. My basket and the whole of the keel had already passed the Trocadero hotels, and had my balloon been a spherical one it would have cleared the building. But now, at the last critical moment, the end of the long balloon that was still full of gas came slapping down on the roof just before clearing it. It exploded with a great noise, struck after being blown up. This was the terrific explosion described in the newspaper of the day. I had made a mistake in my estimate of the wind's force by a few yards. Instead of being carried on to fall on the Seine embankment, I now found myself hanging in my wicker basket high up in the courtyard of the Trocadero hotels, supported by my airship's keel, that stood braced at an angle of about 45 degrees between the courtyard wall above and the roof of a lower construction farther down. The keel, in spite of my weight, that of the motor and machinery, and the shock it had received in falling, resisted wonderfully. The thin pine scantlings and piano wires of Nice, the town where the idea of a keel first suggested itself, had saved my life. After what seemed tedious waiting, I saw a rope being lowered to me from the roof above. I held to it and was hauled up, when I perceived my rescuers to be the brave firemen of Paris. From their station at Passy they had been watching the flight of the airship. They had seen my fall and immediately hastened to the spot. Then, having rescued me, they proceeded to rescue the airship. The operation was painful. The remains of the balloon envelope and the suspension wires hung lamentably, and it was impossible to disengage them except in strips and fragments. End of the Services of Santos-Dumont, Part 1. Recording by William Tomko.